tonight to another ChangeTN conversation ahead of the presidential debate taking place in Nashville. Promise this one will be a lot more civil than what you're going to see on the debate stage tonight. Tonight we have Mariah Phillips, candidate for State House 37, and Glenn Scruggs, candidate for State Senate District 10. So I want to go ahead and jump right into it, give you both the opportunity to tell people who you are, where your districts are at, and what you're running on. So Glenn, I'm going to go ahead and throw it to you first.
Okay, so like you mentioned, my name's Glenn Scruggs. I'm running for District 10 down here in Tennessee, Chattanooga. And my district is sort of it's a weird shape. So it's all of Chattanooga for the most part, except for Hickson. It swings up to Bradley County, excluding Cleveland. So it's a sort of a hodgepodge kind of shaped district, but it's what we call home. And I've grown up right here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I'm a Chattanooga native. I went to school here. I was raised here. And I like to describe myself as sort of a, you hear that old adage that it takes a village to raise a kid. Well, I'm that kid, right? My parents had me super early. They were in high school. And so because they got married so young, they leaned very heavily on my grandparents on both sides to sort of keep me between the ditches and try to raise me. And so I had a very eclectic upbringing. One of my granddads, who was one of my primary role models, was a cab driver and everything that comes with that. And the other one was a Baptist deacon and everything that comes with that, right? So it was a very well-rounded upbringing. But what I learned from both of those guys was that hard work usually wins the day, and that they worked very hard to keep me out of trouble, which was very easy to slip into. If you know anything about Chattanooga, anything about the inner city of Chattanooga, say in the late 80s, early 90s, you'd know that it was a very easy time for a young man to get off course. And so I managed to to squeak through my rear end. I went to school here, of course, like I said, UTC in Chattanooga. And in college, when we were in college, a good friend of mine, Curtis Green, convinced me to join the police department. He brought the idea up. And I got to be honest, in the neighborhood I grew up in, becoming a cop wasn't really high on the priority list. It just wasn't. And so I took that idea back to my girlfriend then. She's now my wife, Starla, and my grandparents and my parents. And we sat down, and I honestly anticipated a ton of pushback because, again, it wasn't the field that I was even studying for. But they were all supportive about it. They were all in. And my best friend, Curtis, was so enthusiastic about the idea. And I was like, well, if I don't like it, I can always quit, right? So I applied, and I got hired, and it was a perfect fit. My skill set and my knowledge of, the inner city and the city itself, it just worked perfectly. And I just started ticking through the ranks. I've done everything at the Chattanooga Police Department, from patrol, of course, when you enter, to homicide, to one of the founding members of our gang unit. I've done everything in that building except for hang drywall. So it's been a really good career. But through those 26 years, and I've been there for 26 years, I had an anniversary on the 14th of October. But what I picked up along the way was that there were some issues that we're facing in Chattanooga and across this district that even if you were the best cop, the very best, that we can't police our way out of. You can't police your way into having like good schools. You can't police your way into having a city that has a livable wage for the labor force. Some issues that we're facing that I would see on a day-to-day basis during my days as a cop that I was seeing that wasn't being impacted by just simply being law enforcement. And those are some of the problems that I wanted to run on. I got tired of getting off from work. You get off from work, kick your shoes off, and you click on Fox or MSNBC or CNN, and you're sitting there wagging your fist at the TV because you're mad about the things they're doing in Nashville and in DC. And I was thinking to myself, well, if I wasn't happy with it, with the things they were doing, and even my conservative coworkers, because most cops in Tennessee are conservative, and I work in a building full of really good guys who happen to be Republicans and who happen to be very conservative guys. But the things that were going on in Nashville and in DC, they weren't happy about. So my thinking was, well, if they're not representing me, and they're not representing these guys, who are they representing? And so that sort of spurred me to get off the couch and to get in the race. And I've been pushing ever since. We announced in early February, late January, and it's been grinding ever since. But it's been really good.
That's awesome. We're happy to have you in the race. Yeah, Washington can be maddening, but Nashville is enough to make you pull your hair out. Uh, it truly is. Mariah, why don't you tell people more about who you are, more about your district, and what you're running on?
Absolutely. And Glenn, I really appreciate your service, working with the police department. My brother's a police officer, and I come from a family of public servants, police officers, fire department. I'm a teacher, public school teacher. My sisters are all teachers. So public service is something that that is really important to me. And so thank you for taking that on and working so hard. But one of the things you said was truly correct. You can't solve the problems of our communities strictly through law enforcement. In fact, if you can right size some of those other things, like make sure that our workers have a livable wage, make sure that they have the health care, the mental health care that they need, making sure that that families have the opportunity to be sustainable and have secure housing, that actually helps the law enforcement problem that we have in some of our communities. And so those things really work hand in hand to make our communities better and safer for our families. So my name is Mariah Phillips, and I'm running for State House in District 37. District 37 is the northwest part of Rutherford County. So I border Davidson County and Wilson County, if you guys know where those are. So it's kind of borders the rural community, but also we are the suburbs of Nashville. And so so we have a very diverse working class neighborhood, a lot of factory workers. Nissan is located in our community. Bridgestone is located here. A lot of people that commute into Nashville, and so we have really hardworking, good people that live in District 37. It's 1/4 of Rutherford County. And so luckily for me, Glenn, my whole district takes place in one county, and that does make a difference. So I feel like that's an advantage for me. But I am a public school teacher. I taught U.S. government and personal finance at an alternative school in Rutherford County. So I work with at-risk youth. That's a passion of mine, is making sure that young people really feel that they have the opportunity to be successful and that they value themselves as members of our community. And so working at the alternative school, I saw a lot of those same issues, Glenn, that you had mentioned earlier. But also just as a community member myself and as a mother of 5, I know what working families need. And I think that for me, it's important that we have representatives that truly see past the partisanship and kind of those extremities that exist in politics right now, and actually focus on what the people need so that they can have safer communities, better schools, better commute time so they can get home on time to have dinner with their family on the way to soccer practice or the football game or whatever else they want to do together. And so I actually started running for office. As I mentioned before, I was a US government teacher, got my political science degree at MTSU. Never thought that I would run for office. I wanted to be a high school teacher. And so I did that. But after the 2016 election, I will say that teaching during that very difficult time for our nation, teaching U.S. government during that time was really tough. And the vitriol that we heard in our communities, and the exchanges on Facebook where family members unfriend each other, my students were bringing that into the classroom. And I really felt like I needed to do something more to make the changes just to make our community stronger. And so I decided, actually after the 2016 election, to get involved. And eventually that led to running for US Congress in 2018. As a public school teacher, I just, that was the best solution I could think of, was to really change the conversation from the inside out. And so I ran an incredible race in 2018. I'm very proud of the work that we did. We did not win that race, however, but what we did do is we moved the needle quite a bit, especially here in Rutherford County where I live, because the district, like yours, Glenn, was 16 counties that I had to maneuver through. And so basically Nashville to Chattanooga. And so being able to impact just District 37, which is 1/4 of Rutherford County, really let me connect to the people that I already know. The people that I go to church with, the people that I see at Starbucks, getting their coffee, the people that that my kids have played sports with or been in theater with. And so we believe that you should have a representative that knows you and that you know who they are. And so we've been running this campaign. We launched our campaign right in March. As we were planning our launch party, at the end of March, we shut it all down due to COVID. And so we're still waiting for that launch party to happen, but instead we're going to have a victory party on November 3rd when we win this thing. So we've been working hard ever since to connect to voters across the districts.
There you go.
Perfect. Yeah, I know COVID threw a wrench in a lot of campaign plans. Hate that you never got that launch party, but I'm looking forward to the victory party though.
Me too.
Perfect. Well, you touched on something that I wanted to ask you about, Mariah. So you did run for the 4th Congressional District back in 2018. I just want to know maybe what were some of the reasonings why you decided to choose to run for this seat rather than retry again in the Congressional District?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that I have been asked quite a bit. I had every intention after the 2018 election to run for Congress again. But running for Congress and spreading yourself through 16 counties is really difficult. It was really hard on my family. I do have, I do have 5 children. My husband is a small business owner. He's a musician who travels, and it really took a lot of my family's commitment for me to run for Congress. And I will honestly, they were exhausted. They didn't have the same benefit and enthusiasm and energy that I had going into the race. And so they were exhausted. And so that was something that I really considered as I was thinking about what I was going to do in 2018 or in 2020 after that election. And, the more that I thought about it, the more that I continued to look at the results from the election and really started to analyze the information, I recognized that the things that I cared most passionately about, which was properly funding our education, making sure that our teachers were paid the way they needed to, making sure that we got the healthcare that we needed across the state, and making sure that our communities were safer and stronger as we move forward, I could actually have a greater impact in the State House than I could in a national office where I'm competing against all these other voices. I really want to make the change. I'm not running because I want some big title. I'm running because I want to make a difference for my neighbors, and I can do that best in the State House.
Yeah, and I think it's important too to know that, like, for anyone that's thinking about running for office, your first time running is very hard. And I wouldn't get discouraged if that race doesn't go your way, because try again. There are also plenty of other offices for you to run for too. So I appreciate you stepping back up and stepping into a new role to run for, because we definitely need it in the State House.
Yeah.
So Glenn, I want to turn to you now. So you've mentioned that you're in your 26th year. Great. Okay, I wanted to make sure I got that right. 26th year now with the Chattanooga Police Department, and you are also the Assistant Chief of Police. How has that role for you impacted the way that you're running your campaign now?
Well, initially when we had our kickoff in early February, in my mind, because I'm a rookie candidate, right? I haven't been a rookie in a long time in anything, but because I'm a rookie candidate, in my mind, I'd envisioned compartmentalizing my job, doing it from 9 to 5, and then from 5 until campaign, and that's worked out just a little bit. I mean, for the most part, it's been it's been up and down, but it's I've gotten a lot of great feedback from the public. I mean, because I was pretty much an active police officer. When you go through the ranks, sometimes you become less and less involved in the day-to-day in the communities, right? Well, I've always part of my goal was always to not let that happen, to always be totally committed and attached to the community. And so because I had that going for me, it wasn't a hard shift. I didn't have to change a lot, but I did have to expend a whole lot more energy, right? And so I was doing a bunch of stuff by day as a police officer and doing a bunch of stuff in the evenings on the weekend as a campaign candidate. And the guys that work around me and work for me, we've had some really good conversations offline and off the job, but for the most part, it's been really cool. I've had a great experience with it.
That's awesome. Yeah. I've always loved campaigning, and I can imagine it's a lot different as a candidate rather than as a volunteer or someone working on the campaign. So I want to get into a few policy questions for you all before we break down how we can change Tennessee.
There we go.
So I wanted to get your all's opinion. We are in the midst of a global pandemic, but we're also facing another existential crisis right around the corner. So climate change has become a big issue this election, and probably the biggest it's ever been since it's first started being discussed. So Tennessee is already seeing these effects at a rapid rate. Gatlinburg here saw one of the worst forest fires it's ever seen. Middle Tennessee has seen historic flooding, as well as West Tennessee. So what are your all's objectives as legislatures to pass legislation focused on combating climate change on the state level? And Glenn, I'll throw this one back to you first.
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, I'm impressed by our candidate for U.S. Senate, right? Like,
Absolutely.
And when she jumped in the race, I lit up, because that argument hasn't been brought to the forefront by very many candidates, right? Environmental justice hadn't been brought to the forefront, hardly by anyone. And so I was encouraged by that. I think we have to have leadership that acknowledges the science. I mean, folks who are serious people know that climate change is real, and know that that it is a man-made situation. They know that man has a definite impact on it. And so we'd be looking for legislation to push for environmental precautions. We don't want to dampen business. You don't want to negatively impact the economy. But at the same time, if we don't take care of our environment, our waters, our streams, my town is a river city. We make a ton of our income on tourism, and that's going to dry up if our waters are bad, if the mountains get eroded, if the trees burn down in our wilderness because of climate change. So we have to make sure that when we're putting legislation together, we keep those things in mind. Oftentimes, we're so singularly driven to make laws and to pass laws to impact the economy that we overlook the things that count the most. And like my dad says all the time, because he's an old school environmentalist. My dad's like, there won't be an economy if there's no people, and there won't be any people if we destroy the environment. And those things ring true today. As you can see, from the national level all the way down to the state, environmental issues always get pushed to the back. Mm-hmm. I want to be a voice of the people, which means I want to take care of issues that directly impact our environment. And so you listen to the scientists, you listen to folks like, Marquita Bradshaw, because she's crazy passionate about it. And you pay attention to the signs that don't take a scientist to figure out. Gatlinburg, the way it went up, that's not supposed to happen. Mm-hmm. That's definitely driven by the things we see happening throughout climate change. And so we focus on those issues. We listen to the experts. We make legislation to represent that.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to Chattanooga too, they've been a great example of what can be done, because for people that don't know, back in the 70s, Chattanooga was dealt with a lot of smog issues, but the city there came together and worked on ways to reduce that, and it's actually used as a case study now for really good environmental legislation.
We always hear that quote, Chattanooga was the smoggiest or dirtiest city in America. Went back in I guess it was the 60s, was it?
Something like that, 60s, 70s.
Yeah,
I'm recalling a little bit on my environmental economics course now.
I know, man. And so I've looked for that quote, because you hear it all the time.
Yeah.
And it gets attributed to a person, but I've never been able to nail that down. But I know for a fact that it was not anywhere near where it is now.
Yeah.
Chattanooga was like night and day compared to how it was, 40, 50 years ago. And we're good, we're glad about it. We're happy about it.
Yeah, it's truly turned that city around. So Mariah, I want to get your opinion on this too. You're near another you're in the suburbs of Davidson County, but Davidson County and a lot of the metropolitan areas here are responsible for a lot of pollution that we're seeing. So what are some of the ways that you would want to see urban areas combat this, as well as rural areas, because there's a lot we can do there as well?
Well, what's interesting about Rutherford County is we actually have one of the largest dumps in the state of Tennessee, and we call it Mount Trashmore. out here. And it is said that by 2025, it will be to capacity. So they're trying to make a decision right now. I mean, that's right around the corner. So they're trying to make a decision right now on whether or not they're going to expand the dump, which of course, Rutherford County is also one of the fastest growing communities in the country. And so what else has, expanded around the dump is housing development. So we have more and more housing encroaching on this dump. And so the idea is now is, do we continue to bump the dump out, or do we continue to develop in those areas? The smell has really been a problem this year. And so we, oftentimes we think about just the smog coming from factories and that sort of thing. But, it's a huge issue. If we pollute our waterways, our drinking water in Rutherford County, if we pollute, if we continue to expand our dump and don't find more renewable solutions for our trash and our waste in our state, because everyone in Middle Tennessee uses the dump in Rutherford County for their waste disposal. And so that is becoming a huge problem. They're starting to test the water now and the air quality because of the impact of the dump in Rutherford County. So that is definitely something that impacts my district very directly. But when you think about decisions, whenever it comes to the environment, and even in Chattanooga, Chattanooga is one of my favorite places in the state to go to visit because of the things that they have done to keep that community so beautiful. I didn't go there in the 60s and 70s when it was the dirtiest place, right? I've gone there in the 90s and the 2000s and the 2020s. So I love what you guys have done in that community to really grow and expand the natural resources that you have in your community. And I think that we often, when we come to, making policy or setting regulations for businesses, we often don't think proactively, we think reactively. Whenever there's a spill, we react to clean it up. But as a nation, unfortunately, we have been loosening those regulations over the last 20 to 30 years. In the 1970s, we really started to wake up to this idea of being, environmentally responsible. Earth Day was established, and we started really bringing attention to this issue. And a lot of communities cleaned themselves up. But in the 80s and the 90s, we started pulling back those regulations, and we are coming into, again, that crisis that you're talking about, because we are no longer thinking proactively, we're thinking reactively. And if we want our communities to be some of the best places to live in the country, then we need to make sure that we're preserving our air and water quality and our natural resources. And this should not just be a democratic issue or a progressive issue, because I will tell you, I have a lot of friends who hunt and fish. And if there is no longer places for them to hunt because there are no longer woods available for them, or the water is contaminated and the fish they're pulling out of that stream or that river is contaminated, they're going to lose what they enjoy doing as well. So this is not just for the progressives. This is for all of us in Tennessee who enjoy the outdoors and the beautiful state that we live in. So I think it's important that we look at policy proactively, not just reactively.
Yeah, and it seems that, even, and this is a theme with a lot of policies and legislation in the state, many Tennesseans agree with, the need to do something about climate change. Many Tennesseans agree, on a whole variety of issues, but the General Assembly and the House, the GOP majority, they never take these issues up. And we always get somehow sucked back into a slate of hate, which is wonderful that our state even has something like that.
And somehow we always get convinced that, it's going to be it's a zero-sum game, right? Either you care about the environment or you care about the economy. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive, right? And you're right. They shouldn't be partisan issues. We all should care that we have fresh water and clean water. We all should care that the air isn't polluted. But like I said, every now and then, every 20 or so years, we get convinced that environmentalism is just bad for business. If you do it properly, it's great for business.
Absolutely.
We just got to make sure we focus on that.
Yeah. And I think the bottom line here is that we need both of you in the State House and the State Senate, and we need Marquita Bradshaw in the Senate as well, advocating for all this.
Yeah.
So I want to switch topics now. I want to talk a little bit about criminal justice in Tennessee. So Tennessee has one of the highest incarceration rates in the state, or in the country, excuse me, and is most notably above the US's average. We average about 853 people per 100,000 individuals that are incarcerated. So clearly our criminal justice system is broken. About 3-to-1 ratio in terms of African Americans and people of color being locked up compared to whites in the state. So I want to get your all's thoughts. One, given the recent events around George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, how, if any way, has your views on criminal justice changed? And what do you think needs to be addressed to fix our broken criminal justice system in Tennessee? And Mariah, I'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, well, I wish you would have started with the cop. That would have been. But no, but this is actually something that I'm very passionate about. Working at the alternative school, one of the things that I noticed, I worked with students who are in that school to prison pipeline that educators talk about so much. My students get kind of put into the system. A lot of my students, come out of juvenile justice, or if they don't show up for a couple of days, we call JDC to find out if they've been locked up and we didn't hear about it yet. And so a lot of those students that I've worked with over the years, are part of the system, unfortunately, and they are behind before they even turn 18, and it's really a problem. So one of the things that I recognize just on my own from working in that environment was that even in the school systems, we weren't doing enough to prepare our students to reduce recidivism. And so that's something that I'm really passionate about, is reducing recidivism. That the number, for those of you who don't know what that is, it's the number of times that people leave the judicial system and then end up getting reincarcerated for similar or even a different crime, and they re-enter the system. And so I actually did research on this for a graduate project when I was working on my master's in educational leadership, because I was so passionate about it. And so one of the things that I recognized in Rutherford County, we sent students to the alternative school for zero tolerance offenses, which are drugs, weapons, the typical zero tolerance offenses, at basically the same rate that of our population. So Rutherford County has 18% African American. About 20% of our students that were sent to the alternative school for zero tolerance offenses were Black. So we were kind of matching that profile. But when students were sent for other offenses such as defiance, disobedience, truancy, some of those other non-zero tolerance offenses, it was at a rate of 5-to-1. And so I saw that there is a systemic problem that existed in how our students were being sent to the alternative school. And so I wanted to make an impact on that. And then I saw how many of those students continued to return. 60% of our students returned back to the alternative school once they served their time. And so I basically attacked that, and I did research based on prison systems across the world, because outside of the United States, they actually handle this in many places much better than we do overall in this country. And so there is one of the things that I saw over and over again in these criminal justice systems that were really providing justice and reducing recidivism was through opportunities and through investment in opportunities for people who were being released, and also like mentorship programs for the people who are leaving jail, and housing was also another very important issue. So I decided to implement something like that in our alternative school. Now, obviously, in the school system, housing was not something I could deal with, but mentorship was. And so I started working with my students, and this was through a partnership with the other high schools that were in my area. When a high school student was being released from my school back to their traditional school, they worked for 2 weeks with a mentor to kind of establish a relationship. And once they were released, they were required to meet with that mentor every day for 2 weeks. so that they can talk about what teachers, they didn't feel comfortable talking to, where were they having issues, were there friends that were trying to kind of pull them back into trouble, were they showing up? Because a lot of the students, the teachers, just like in society, when somebody's released from prison, what do you think about that person? You think they're just a criminal, they're going to end up getting in trouble again. Yeah. Well, this mentorship program really allows both the student as well as the teachers to start to rethink who this student is and kind of set them up for success. And so we saw our recidivism rate drop to 30% once we got this program in place. And that was an incredible testament to the great mentors that we had across the district that were really, honored to be asked to support these kids in their transition back to their home schools. Now, we weren't 100% successful. There were some kids that honestly did like being in a more restricted environment. They felt safer. They actually felt like they did better. They were more comfortable. So there's a whole conversation that translates to the jail system, the prison system about that as well. But it was something that we weren't successful 100%, but the students that we were able to impact, we made life-changing impacts on those students. So when I think about, I think about that, whenever I think about changes that we need in our criminal justice system. I am passionate about the idea that people should be treated with humanity. And honestly, Officer Scruggs, if I could say that I believe that, having a brother as a police officer as well, that you're the professional in the room, right? When you make a traffic stop or you have to be the one that acts the most professionally, especially if you're dealing with someone who is potentially violent or mentally ill or, whatever the situation is. And so doing the best that you can to keep yourself safe, yep, and to keep the person that you are dealing with safe in that scenario.
Yeah, and I like your approach, because as an educator, I think this is a multifaceted level issue. You've got the school to prison pipeline. You've got, what are the ways that we can work on policing, and what are the ways that we can work on how we incarcerate individuals. So I think, the ways that we can look at this are huge, and I appreciate your take on that as someone who comes from that education background. But now I do want to turn to the law enforcement officer, and I want to ask, you're in this position where you see, what might be working, what might not be working. So I want to get your insight into how can we transform our criminal justice system in Tennessee to be much more equitable and, actually work towards recidivism and work towards transformation rather than just locking someone up and throwing away the key.
Yeah, like both of you guys mentioned, it's so multifaceted. I think when people think about criminal justice reform, they think about policing immediately, and they only think about policing. These things, there's so many different silos that we need to break down and address to impact criminal justice reform, right? And so Mariah hit it right on the head. If you take some of this energy that we focus on policing these things into compliance, which is never going to work. You're never going to police it completely into compliance. What you do is you attack it on the front end. You stem the flow of water, into the boat, which means you plug the hole up. If you can educate these kids, catch them early before they enter the system, you can do yourself a great bit of service, as a society, to impact criminal justice before it even becomes a thing. We need to put way more focus on interrupting the flow of these kids falling into the wrong path. We're very bad about doing that. We're very, very bad as a society about addressing these issues on the front end. Anyone who tell you, anyone who's done the numbers, who's run the numbers, will tell you that it's much cheaper to educate a kid than it is to incarcerate one. And so if you impact these kids very early on through mentors, through proper funding of public schools, through having their parents have a livable wage, so someone's there to raise the kid instead of working two jobs, and letting the kid raise himself, in the house and just running around the neighborhood. Those issues all intersect. We also have to look at the fact that a lot of folks still look at criminal justice as if every action requires incarceration as a punishment. There's a ton of other mechanisms to correct behavior outside of locking people away. every issue does not require you to be harshly punished. Some of these folks do, especially some of the kids. I especially want to focus on the younger end of that spectrum. Those folks can definitely be impacted by great mentors, whether it's Mariah or a guy who works down at a grocery store who's a manager. Just a positive person, because of what I've noticed in a lot of these communities and a lot of these situations, it's absent. That's the absence is what draws the kids into bad behavior, which creates young men and young women who are in bad behavior, which creates young adults who are committing crimes. And so if you can interrupt that flow, those different chains of activity, you can impact criminal justice reform without even fooling with much budgetary issues. You just have to make sure you reallocate the funding to take care of the issues that impact communities. It's funny when I look back on my childhood, people would look at my home and think, hey, that kid came from a broken home. His parents divorced relatively quickly. But what happens is when looking from a 30,000 foot downward angle on it, is when my parents divorced, I didn't lose a parent. I just gained two other ones because they both remarried. And I had two families keeping me between the ditches, right? A lot of the kids that we encounter, both in the schools and in the criminal justice programs, they're not getting at that. And so you need to properly fund education. You need to make sure that when folks do stumble and they do get incarcerated, that you have some sort of re-entry program to re-guide them back into the mainstream. We call ourselves a society that believes in redemption, right? Believes in making folks whole after they've been punished. But we really don't practice that. When folks come out of prison, they have the big scarlet letter on their chest forever. And it impacts housing, impacts employment. Mm-hmm. And it also, very often drives them right back into where they were going when they got incarcerated. We need to be honest about the issues. We need to make sure we put policies and legislation in place to correct some of that. And it doesn't impact the dollars like people want to say it does. Because the money that we spend in incarcerating thousands and thousands of Tennesseans, we definitely can spend on educating those same folks on the front end.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's an important issue that unfortunately has gotten pushed back because of COVID and everything else going on. But it's something that is going to have to be addressed. And luckily, these demonstrations have brought to light what needs to be fixed. So I appreciate both your answers on that one. So we've talked a little bit about some heavy topics, so I kind of want to switch it up. Do our favorite part now, where I let the candidates ask each other a question. So I always like to see what you all come up with. So Glenn, I'm going to let you ask Mariah a question.
So yeah, she sort of answered it early on because it was sort of cooking in my head for a while when I saw that she'd run before. So you ran for Congress the first time around, right? And you said that it was much harder than running for the state house. But was the experience better? Did you have a better experience going from county to county? How do you compare the two?
Wow. Honestly, it is hard to compare, to be honest, because of COVID. Running this year is just very different overall than running in 2018. But I will say, there's pros and cons to both. I have made incredible relationships across this area. So all of Middle Tennessee, I have friendships that will never die, right? Because of the relationships that I've built when I've run for office. And I'm sure that you have probably made some really great relationships through your campaign this year as well. And so I have had just really incredible relationships built and established because of my run for Congress. And I will say that running for Congress, and I think because of the positive energy that we built in our campaign in 2018, because of the hard work that we really put in, we had both a grassroots organization with volunteers in all 16 counties, but we also had a pretty good grass tops organization. And so we were able to raise $650,000 in 2018, which I will say as a public school teacher, I'm like, that's like, 15 years of salary. But we were able to really show the state of Tennessee that we were here to do the work and that we were going to continue to be the hardest working candidate that you've ever met. And so because of that kind of background, when I ran, now that I'm running for State House, I have so much groundwork already laid that so here now that I'm in the 37th district, it's very easy for me to be across the district in a day. I can hit, my largest communities are Murfreesboro, Smyrna, and Laverne. I can be at an event in each one of those. I can knock doors in all three, communities in the same day. And so it's much, that part of it is much easier, but really it's the relationships that we built in 2018 that made it possible for us to do such a great job continuing to reach out in 2020. And so I will say that as a community-based person myself, while I enjoyed traveling the 4th Congressional District, I love being able to be home every night.
Yeah.
And I love being able to go to my son's soccer game and then go knock doors in the neighborhood, when his game's over. And that I missed a lot when I was running for Congress because I had to be in so many communities at the same time. And so, but because of that relationship, that trust that we built, we've continued to be successful. And my hashtag is Have You Met Mariah? Because I think, everyone should know who wants to represent them, and you should be able to connect with that person. They should be available to you. And I can tell you that more people know me in my district than know my opponent, and he's the incumbent. So what does that say?
Yeah. I love that question. That was a good one. So Mariah, I want to get your question to Glenn.
Yeah. So actually, one question that I did have for you, just as somebody who, and I hate to bring it back to law enforcement, but I do think it's an important question that I'd like to hear a little bit more about. How has the law enforcement community, or how has the community that supports law enforcement, I don't want to say how does the community that, there's often a separation between, I'll say it this way, Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter.
Yes, definitely. There generally is a separation.
And I think that's a shame.
Yes. Because
the reason that Black Lives Matter is because all lives matter, including police officers. So, we, I'm married to a Black man. I told you my brother's a police officer. We have a lot of these conversations in my family all the time. And I would just like to know kind of how does that work in your environment as an officer? Obviously, you are high ranking. And so you worked really hard to establish a great reputation in your community. How do those relationships intersect, and how do both communities respond to you?
So that's like the best question ever. It's the best question ever. Coming from a school teacher, that's the best question ever.
I do what I can.
So here's the thing, right? So from the time I pinned my badge on back in '94, all the way till now, I've tried to be very, very consistent in how I attack issues, right? And so when a cop would get accused of doing something, if he did something wrong, and he actually did something wrong, I would own that. As a law enforcement officer or as a law enforcement executive, I would own that action. I would say, hey, that guy did wrong. We need to punish that guy or whatever, right? And conversely, if something happened in the community where the community saw an action that an officer took that they didn't agree with, if I knew that action to be right, I would own that as well. I'm like, hey guys, yeah, I know that upset some people, and I know that particular thing looked rough, but that was the right thing to do in that moment. And so I've been crazy consistent from the time I started until now. Well, fast forward to several years back when all the disruptions in the streets started happening. Both camps, the Blue Lives Matter camp and the Black Lives Matter camp, have sort of demanded that I make a decision, that I choose one side or the other, right? And my argument has always been those two belief systems aren't mutually exclusive. I respect completely the field of law enforcement. If I didn't, I wouldn't have put 26 years into it. I don't necessarily like the term law and order, but I know that's felt and that's received totally different from depending on what audience you're sitting in. So I don't like that particular slogan. I think it lands wrong depending on where you are. But also, I'm a black man. I'm a black man in this country, right? And so I also understand the mistrust and the history of mistreatment from sometimes law enforcement officers to marginalized communities. what I tell people in both camps, because I engage with both camps all the time. I tell people right down the middle, I'm for what's right in that moment. So when a black officer does something, or I'm sorry, when a black person gets mistreated by a police officer, I call that what it is. I don't say, hey, the guy has a hard job, it was a rough day, and you guys don't understand. You didn't see the whole video, or whatever people say. I don't say that thing. I say that guy misbehaved. That conduct was inappropriate. And when a young person in the black community does something that sort of, that's blasted by the media, I own that as well. I make sure I stay consistent. And so that's the way I approach it. And because I've done that, I've not always been, folks understand it and they respect it. They don't always like it. Because people tend to want you to be sort of one or the other. They want you to join one tribe or the other. Well, I can't. I'm a black man who happens to be a black police officer. And you can't separate those things. You can't cut them down the middle and make it one or the other. Because I know both of those things have value. I'm going to retire from this job, heck, this year, hopefully when I win. But even if I didn't retire this year, I'm going to retire at some point. I'm never going to retire from being a black person. That doesn't happen. And so I have to be true to myself, but also respect the men and women that do this job every day and do it well. So I guess to smash that answer back down, I'm consistent. And I speak to people honestly about it. I don't skirt the issues.
I love that. Thank you for that answer. That was an excellent answer.
I'm talking to two educators, so I have to be on point. I have to try to stay on point.
The thing is that I love about that is the consistency. And so much in politics right now, we see the inconsistencies of, when the politicians say one thing and then their life reflects something different. And it's very refreshing to hear you talk about being consistent. I feel like you probably feel like that's one of your strengths, just the way that you talk about that.
It makes it easy. It makes it easier.
Yes, it does. It does make it easier. And so, so thank you for your consistency and, for sticking up for the communities that you serve, all of them.
Well, thank you.
Perfect. And
thanks for the great question too, by the way. That is a great question.
You both asked really good questions. I don't know why I'm here. I could just have you all do it. So we're getting close to the end here. So I've got a couple more things I'm going to ask you all, and we'll go ahead and close out tonight. But something that I've noticed is that in 2018, we had several state house and state Senate seats competitive. And I mean that in terms, there's a Democrat or an independent in the race challenging the incumbent. This year in the state house, there's 41 seats that have gone without a Democrat in the race. So I want to ask, what would be advice you would give to someone who is on the verge of running for office, who is thinking about it, thinking they want to do it, but not sure? What advice would you give that person? And
can I start with that one? Just
yeah,
because
go for it.
Run in 2018, there was a really big push in 2018 to make sure that every state house seat was filled. And sometimes it was somebody felt very pressured to go into the seat and they weren't really in it because they wanted to make an impact. And I will say all of the candidates that I met in 2018 really were passionate, good people. And any of them would have served incredibly in the state house had they been elected. But because we had so many candidates running in seats that were, honestly going to be very difficult to win, if they weren't in it to win it and they were kind of putting their name on the ballot so that we could have somebody on the ballot, that's just, it's very difficult as a Democrat to feel like you have somebody to support. Just because their name's on the ballot doesn't mean that they're passionate and engaged and involved. And so it is disheartening to go to the polls and not have a Democrat on the ballot. I understand that is also frustrating, but it's also, there's nothing more important than having a candidate, Democrat, Republican, Independent, whatever, who is passionate about why they're running and the reason why they got into the race and what they're going to do to make the changes. Just putting your name on the ballot is not a good enough reason to run for office, because it is hard work. You make personal sacrifices. As I've talked about, sacrificing time with my family when I ran for Congress, and having to, tonight after this call, I'm going to another community event that's happening, and then I'm rushing home and making some popcorn and watching the debate. So, it's important to have somebody that cares about why they're running to run. Now, for somebody who is thinking about running, find mentors who have done it before and ask for help and follow their advice. The number one, thing that I need to let people know, and, Glenn, I don't know how you feel about this, but you have to have some money to get into the race. Now, you don't have to have the money. I'm a public school teacher. I started with, no money in my pocket. Marquita Bradshaw started with, what'd she say, $2.12 in her bank account. Right now, she's raised millions of dollars. But you cannot win an election if you can't get yard signs in the ground, if you can't get, phone calls made, and if you can't get, flyers on the door. You have to be able to make the investment of your time to raise some money. And it's the hardest thing that I have to do as a candidate is call people and ask them for money. I will tell you, it is the hardest thing, because who wants to do that? And sometimes I have a call time manager that helps me because that's what I need. And, and sometimes he'll say, okay, today you're going to call Mary Beth. And I'm like, oh, I don't want to call Mary Beth. I called her. She didn't give me any money last time I called her. And he's like, yeah, we're going to prime in the pump. We're doing it. It's like, you got to make those phone calls, and you've got to ask people that know you for money. And honestly, sometimes people that don't know you, and you got to convince them that you're worth it. And that's, that's something that I'm happy to coach people on, to talk to them about, because the money does deter good people from running, and it shouldn't. Because if somebody is passionate about running for office, then they are worth the investment. So you don't have to put your own money in the campaign, but you have to be willing to ask other people to make that investment and to be worth someone's investment. So anyway, I'll start with that.
That's great. That's great. Glenn, what's some advice you would give to someone who's thinking about running here in the future?
So Mariah covered the part, one half of that coin. All right. So I'm going to attack the other side of it. Everything she said and double it. All right. What I would like to see going forward is, and whether I win or lose or draw, if that's even possible, win, lose, or draw, I'm solely committed to doing this one thing. From my perspective, from looking at it from as a first-time candidate, as a first-time guy running for office, I would very much like to see the Democratic Party in Tennessee build a bench. All right. I'm going to use some sports analogies because I'm a sports guy. We have a great starting five all the time. We have a great starting five. What we don't always have is a couple, 2, 3, 4 people on the bench waiting to take Mariah's place when Mariah goes on to bigger and better things. That makes it really hard for a new candidate to come in and even want to do it, because there's no one there. It's like starting from scratch every season. And so what I would like to see happen is folks like Mariah, myself, when I get to office, because I'm definitely going to do it, reach back and build that bench of young, positive, smart people to take our places when we leave. We don't work on our replacement plan, and that's what I want to make sure we do, because I think that impacts young people and young energy wanting to get into politics when they know there's an infrastructure already in place. They know there's mentors already lined up to talk to you. Because she's right. Had I jumped into this race and I had anyone to sort of bounce ideas off of or show me how the system itself works, I didn't know anything about petitions or any of that stuff, going in. You have to have someone there who you can reach out to and go, hey, I'm interested. What do I do? And I think a lot of times in a lot of these races and a lot of these districts, that's just not there. Some of these communities just don't have that infrastructure. So as a party, we need to make sure that we reinvest. And I think you start with guys and gals who are doing volunteer work already, folks who are already phone banking for you. That pool of people, they want to be politicians. They just don't know it yet. So you got to drag those folks, put them on your bench, and build their knowledge base so they can take over, old Glenn when he gets out of here, and Mariah when she moves on to be a movie star. You gotta build your bench, and that's what I definitely intend to do. And so I would encourage anyone who's interested, reach out to folks like Mariah because she's passionate. Reach out to me when I win. I tell you what, reach out to me even if I lose, because I've learned a ton of stuff along the way. So reach out to folks who are willing to help you along the way, because I think that's what we need here in Tennessee. We can flip this state. We pull the numbers. Tennessee isn't a red state; it's a non-voting state. The registrations are pretty neck and neck from Democrats to Republicans. We just got to get our folks activated and mobilized. And so that's my take on it.
Absolutely. I think the key is, to some extent, we feel like we're starting from scratch and rebuilding a party. And I think that started back in 2018. It was the first time I felt something different. So building a base is highly important. Having that passion to run for office is highly important. So I appreciate both those takes. And yeah, if you're watching and you're interested in running for office, reach out to ChangeTN. You can reach us at info@changetn.vote. Reach out to Mariah, reach out to Glenn, reach out to someone that's run for office too, because it seems like it is this daunting task. But if you have someone there to break down that for you, it's a lot easier to do. Perfect. I always like to kind of end on a hopeful note. So we'll kind of end there for the night, but I want to give you all a chance to let people know where they can find you and how they can get involved in your campaign. So Glenn, if you want to go ahead with it.
Sure. So of course, my campaign's website right there in my screen there, glennforsenate.com. There's only a few days left in the campaign, but if you want to pitch in to help make some calls, to knock some virtual doors, you can hit us on that website, and my campaign manager and my field coordinator, Jill, they'll get you right plugged in, glennforsenate.com. We, of course, also are taking donations. As Mariah mentioned, it's painfully hard sometimes to ask for money, but that's a big part of this game. That's a big part of the system. You have to have funds for those signs. So if you want to donate financially, you can do that as well at glennforsenate.com. Give us a hand.
Perfect. Mariah, I'll go ahead and let you close out.
Absolutely. So my name is Mariah Phillips. I'm running for State House in District 37. And my website is Mariah4TN, and that's the number 4, Mariah4TN.com. You can find me on all the socials, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Unfortunately, I'm not on TikTok. My campaign staff wants me to do that. So who knows, in the next 11 days, we might have a TikTok going up. But it's really important right now. We are focusing on getting out the vote, making sure that we're making phone calls, and that we are helping people establish a voting plan. We have been, working hard to make those connections. And if you are able to make some phone calls, you can do that from anywhere in the state, anywhere in the country. If you're watching somewhere else, you can go to Mariah4TN.com and sign up to volunteer or donate if you're interested in that as well. But it's right now, we're just really focused on get out the vote. We have 11 days till we win, according to when this taping is happening right now. So whenever you watch it, it'll be even sooner. So just make sure everybody that gets out to vote. It's so important this year. Sometimes we feel like blue dots in a red sea, and I can assure you that that is not the case. As Glenn said, we are not a red state. We are a non-voting state. And if everybody feels like their vote doesn't matter and their voice isn't important, then we're going to continue to not be able to move the needle. But if everybody that cares like we do about the things that we care about shows up to the polls, we can make a difference in this state. When I moved here in 2006, we were a blue state. So we can be a blue state again, and at least a purple one, because honestly, what we really need is to make sure that we have legislators that are willing to work to solve our problems. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican, but we need to focus on the issues at hand to actually solve the problems for working people. And that's what I've been about. So I appreciate you at ChangeTN for all the work that you are doing, that you guys are doing, because your organization stepped forward just this year and has been making a tremendous impact on democracy in the state. So thank you for what you're doing at ChangeTN.
I appreciate it. Thank you both for running. We definitely need great candidates like you stepping up, getting into Nashville. We're speaking it into existence. You both are going to win on election night, and I look forward to being able to go up to Nashville and lobby on ChangeTN's behalf in your offices. So Glenn
I
mentioned,
won't turn you away. I won't turn you away. I promise.
perfect, perfect. That's more than some of the others might do.
I've heard that.
So Glenn mentioned, we're approaching election day, but there are still plenty of people to reach out to, still plenty of people that haven't gone out to vote. Anyone in your network, make sure that they have a plan to vote. If you haven't voted already, make a plan to vote, get out and vote, and give these candidates some money. They might not ask you for money. I'm going to. Make sure you give them some money in these final days, help them in their push, because these are very close races that we definitely can win. With that, I want to thank you both for joining me tonight. I know y'all are getting busy these last few days, so I'm going to let you all go. Enjoy the debate tonight. You all have a wonderful rest of your evening, and thank you all for tuning in.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.